When judges start making rulings based on politics instead of the law, we then have a problem. My name is Nate the Lawyer, and welcome to the firm. Now, I'm a former cop, former prosecutor, and currently a licensed attorney. Now, if you're new to the firm, don't forget to like this video, share this video, and subscribe to the channel. So let's get into it. Let's talk about Michael Flynn. So let's start with the background. We got to know how we got to where we're at today. Now, Michael Flynn is the former national security advisor for the Trump administration. Now, on December 1st, 2017, Michael Flynn and special counsel Robert Mueller agreed to a plea bargain in the U.S. District Court of the District of Columbia. Now, in that agreement, Michael Flynn pleaded guilty to making willfully and knowingly false statements to the FBI, making both fictitious and fraudulent statements. Now, I think it's important to actually read what Mike Flynn agreed to. So here is Mike Flynn's acceptance of the plea agreement. It says, "I have read every page of this agreement and have discussed it with my attorneys. I fully understand this agreement and agree to it without reservation. I do this voluntarily on my own free will, intending to be legally bound. No threats have been made to me, nor am I under the influence of anything that could impede my ability to understand this agreement fully. I am pleading guilty because I am in fact guilty of the offense identified in this agreement. I reaffirm that absolutely no promises, agreements, understandings, or conditions have been made or entered into in connection with my decision to plead guilty, except those set forth in this agreement. I am satisfied with the legal services provided by my attorneys in connection with this agreement and matters related to it. Signed, Lieutenant General Michael T. Flynn, defendant." So Michael Flynn pleaded guilty and was a convicted felon at that time. His case was then put on for sentencing. Now, on December 18th, 2018, during the sentencing hearing in front of a new judge, Judge Sullivan, Flynn restated and reaffirmed his guilty plea and acknowledged to Judge Sullivan that he was guilty beyond any doubt. And Flynn even went on to acknowledge to Judge Sullivan that he was aware that lying to federal investigators was a crime when he initially lied. And Mike Flynn restated in his guilty plea that he was aware that lying to federal investigators was a crime at the time that he actually lied to them. Now, during that hearing, Judge Sullivan said, quote, "Arguably, you, Mr. Flynn, sold out your country." Then Judge Sullivan went on to warn Flynn that "I cannot assure you that if you proceed today, you will not receive a sentence of incarceration." So he offered Flynn an opportunity to continue to cooperate with the federal government in hopes that Judge Sullivan would not give him a sentence of incarceration. So Judge Sullivan offered to delay sentencing to allow Flynn to continue to cooperate with the government. And Flynn accepted that offer. Now, at this point, Flynn is absolutely guilty. He's a convicted felon, just as if a jury had found him guilty. And the only thing we have to do is sentence him. How much time is he going to get? At this point in time, I got to stop preaching and start teaching. So let's talk about phases of a criminal trial. This is going to be a quick and dirty explanation. Now, a criminal trial can be separated into two phases: the guilt phase and the sentencing phase. Now, in the guilt phase, the prosecutor has discretion to bring charges and to prosecute offenders, right? The prosecutors can even stop investigating and stop prosecuting. This is known as prosecutorial discretion. Now, during the guilt phase, the prosecutors can exercise that discretion whenever they choose. Now, the guilt phase, or the attempt of the government to prove the defendant guilty, ends at the actual verdict, whether the defendant is guilty or not. When the verdict is handed down, either guilty or not guilty, then the prosecutorial discretion ends at that particular point in time. The prosecutors have already proved the defendant guilty, or the defendant was acquitted, whichever one comes first. Now, if and only if the defendant is found guilty, then the criminal trial moves into the next phase, which is the sentencing phase. Now, at sentencing, the court has jurisdiction to give the defendant whatever time the court chooses to give, based on some standards and principles. Simply put, the judge determines the punishment. After a defendant's been convicted, the prosecutor can't just drop the charges. That doesn't make any sense. All the prosecutors can do at sentencing is recommend a variety of sentences. But at no way is the judge bound by the prosecutor's recommendation. They're just not. All the prosecutor can do is attempt to convince the judge to give the defendant either a harsher sentence or a lighter sentence. But at the end of the day, it's up to the judge. And if the prosecutors don't even show up to sentencing, it still doesn't matter because the judge is the one who determines what the sentence is. So there is no prosecutorial discretion at this time. Now, this is why, even in plea agreements, during sentencing, the prosecutor's recommendations are just that. They're recommendations. Now, remember this. In the Flynn case, the prosecutors were recommending no jail time. And Judge Sullivan was saying, that's not going to happen based on what I have in front of me. At the sentencing phase of the trial, something interesting happened in this case, in the Flynn case. The government made a motion to drop the charges. And then the government claimed to have the authority to drop the charges based on prosecutorial discretion. Now, Judge Sullivan entertained a motion to determine if the government had authority to drop the charges based on prosecutorial discretion. But Judge Sullivan asked a couple of very, very interesting legal questions that have to be resolved. Number one, what do you do about the guilty plea? Because that guilty plea is now perjury. Flynn is saying he didn't do it. Flynn is saying he's innocent. Flynn wants to withdraw that guilty plea. But he said it under penalty of perjury. Did he just commit perjury? The second problem that you'd have is, well, by lying to the court twice, Flynn is in contempt of court. You can't just lie and deceive the court. That's known as contempt of court. You don't need a prosecutor for that. The judge himself can just, hey, the defendant's in contempt. What do you do about that? Does that not matter? To get around this problem, Flynn and the government went to the Court of Appeals and asked the Court of Appeals to order Judge Sullivan to dismiss the case. Now, when I first heard this, I thought it was laughable. I didn't think that they would issue an order of mandamus, not based on prosecutorial discretion. Why? Because it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous argument. Essentially, what they're doing is asking the Court of Appeals to overturn a conviction based on prosecutorial discretion. And lo and behold, two Republican judges, one a Trump-appointed judge who actually wrote the opinion, ruled that Flynn's case should be dismissed and ordered the federal judge to dismiss the case, essentially allowing the prosecutor to overturn a conviction based on prosecutorial discretion. This ruling was so bad and so adverse to law that the full appeals court vacated it. They didn't stay it. They didn't put it on hold. They vacated it. That's how bad this ruling is. That's how bad it was on the law. That's how political it was. This judge, Judge Rao, the Trump-appointed judge, made a ruling based on politics and not on the law. It was one of the worst rulings that could have ever been written, and that's why they vacated it. And the full appeals court is going to rehear that case. Now, some people are talking about new evidence in the case and possible Brady violations, but that's not part of the legal issue. That's all politics. That's all what people want to tell you to try to convince you that Flynn should just be let go. That's political spin. Let's talk about the facts and the law. And right now, the issue in front of the Court of Appeals is whether Bill Barr and his Justice Department can overturn convictions based on prosecutorial discretion. I don't care what anybody else is telling you. That's what this case is about. That's what's going to be decided. Now, just to nail everything home, here's Fox News explaining what the issues are in this case. Now, mind you, this is Fox News' news arm, so they're very, very good at the facts. So listen to what they say.
Today, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals announced the full court will hear the case of the Department of Justice's decision to drop charges against President Trump's former national security advisor. A three-judge panel of the D.C. Circuit had earlier upheld the DOJ's decision to dismiss Flynn's case. The original trial judge, Emmett Sullivan, appeared vehemently opposed to Attorney General Barr's decision to drop the charges. His argument was that in dismissing them, Barr interfered in what was the court's territory, that if Flynn didn't like like the court's decision, he could simply file an appeal. Taking on a polar opposite view, Attorney General Breyer believed that Judge Emmett Sullivan was intruding into the Department of Justice's territory. Here he is.
The argument is that it's always been understood that decisions whether to pursue an individual through the prosecution process or holding them criminally accountable is vested in the executive branch and not the courts. And he is essentially, in our view, trying to set himself up as an alternative prosecutor.
So now a panel of 10 of the 11 judges who make up the D.C. Circuit Court, I should say, will hear arguments on August 11th.
The issue is simple. I think the court should and will rule in Sullivan's favor, not because of any politics, but because of the law. Now, Sullivan could rule in Flynn's favor, and then if Flynn doesn't like it, he can then appeal. But at least he's got to rule first. So let me know what you think. Should the prosecutor be able to overturn convictions based on prosecutorial discretion? Should Flynn be held in contempt of court for lying under oath twice? Let me know in the comment section. Let me know if you disagree with me. Hell, I could be wrong. Now, if you've made it to this part of the video, do me a favor. Hit the like button, share this video, and if you're not a sub, I'd appreciate you subbing to the channel. My name is Nate, loyal YouTuber, and I'm out of here. Peace.